This is Jay Martin.
All right, welcome to the Jay Martin Show. Here I am with Jim Rogers. Jim, it's great to have you back on the show. Thanks so much for making the time, and I'm looking forward to chatting with you today.
I am delighted to see you, Jay. It's morning here in Singapore, so I'm delighted to see you.
It's evening here on the Pacific West Coast, where I'm at. Look, Jim, how about we start here? I've heard you say recently that we're probably entering the worst bear market of your lifetime. I've heard people ask you recently if silver is the safe haven, if gold is the safe haven, and you've responded and said, look, I don't ever want to call anything safe when it comes to investing. And so my question for you is, where do you see the least amount of risk right now? Have you allocated any cash anywhere in the last 6 months? And if so, where to?
Just to clarify slightly, what I have said is the next time we have a bear market, it's going to be the worst in my lifetime. 2008, we had a bad problem because of too much debt. Well, Jay, look out the window. Since 2009, the debt has skyrocketed everywhere in the world. It's at staggering levels, which we have never seen in world history. So what I've said, the next time we have a bear market, it's going to be the worst in my lifetime because the debt is so much higher. Now, we may be entering the bear market now, and if not, probably soon. If there's peace in Ukraine, for instance, there would be a big rally. Oil will go down, grain will go down, and people will say, oh, everything is okay. That'll be the last rally, if it happens that way. So we're sort of getting towards the end. We've had the longest period in American history without problems. Why it could go on for 30 years? Never has, but why not? So anyway, we're getting closer, and when it happens, it's going to be very, very bad. Everybody should watch Jay Martin to learn what's going on and be prepared.
Okay. Now, I believe I heard you say you had recently been investing in Uzbekistan. And so I was curious about what you're seeing there. It's a country off of most people's radar, a very small market. And is that the case? Are you buying shares in Uzbekistan? And if so, what do you see there, Jim?
Well, I have invested a little bit in Uzbekistan. I'm glad you reminded me because I do want to invest some more. Uzbekistan was one of the Soviet countries. I've actually been there a couple of times for what that's worth. And like many of the Soviet countries, it was a disaster, closed off, run by another wild dictator. But now there's somebody in Uzbekistan has figured out that doesn't work. We have to change. And they're starting to open up and make the changes that you and I would make if we were going to run an economy. They have a lot of assets there, including tourism. It's a remarkable tourism site, which has been closed off. But there are many, many assets there, and I've invested a little bit, hardly enough to remember, but I'm glad you reminded me because I want to invest more.
Got it. All right. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the last time that we spoke, and this was 2 years ago, you had been purchasing equities in Russia. And at the time, I would say it looked like such a great bet because it's a country with fairly low debt relative to other countries with positive real rates and, a super diverse commodity exporter. Was that the case? And were you able to get out of those positions before the war, or what have you done there?
I did invest in Russia for all the reasons you mentioned and more. I have not been able to get out, but everything is essentially closed. If the world works the way it normally does, eventually the war will come to an end and eventually things will be okay again. Who knows if it's going to work the way it always has throughout history, but if so, I would say, I wish I could be investing in Russia, Jay. I have learned that when you invest in a country at war or a civil war, if you have the staying power and if you get the timing reasonably right, you usually make a lot of money. But I'm an American citizen, so investing in Russia right now is not practical or possible.
Yeah. Okay.
Another place I would like to be investing in Venezuela right now, but again, I'm an American, so cannot.
Hold up, quick interruption to shout out one of our partners here at the Jay Martin Show. This is Masterworks. Now, Masterworks is a platform that gives retail investors like you or I the opportunity to fractionally own pieces of blue chip art. So we're talking about Picasso, Monet, Banksy, etc. Now, why is this exciting? Because the smartest money that I have on my show invests in the art sector. So I want to do that too. Now, last year, I actually bought 2 pieces of art for my home. But knowing nothing about the art industry, I have no idea how they're actually going to appreciate over time. Now, I like them, and maybe that's enough. But if I want to put my cash to work in the art sector, I really want to go after the biggest names in the business, the multi-million-dollar pieces. And this is the access that Masterworks gets you. So check out masterworks.io now. So cannot. Okay. Well, I'm sure you could add a few other countries to that list then. Iran, for example, probably fits the bill, I imagine.
Yes, Iran's a good example. I'd love to invest in Iran, but I'm a citizen of the land of the free, Jay. We're not so free in the land of the free.
Yeah. Okay, let's stick with the war in Russia for a minute. The sanctions on Russian financial assets, mainly US dollar, I think set a new precedent that the world's paying attention to. And central banks all over the world are likely, and they are, reallocating and rebalancing a little bit, lightening up on US dollars. Israel, for example, sold a bunch of US dollars. They purchased Canadian dollars, Australian dollars, and yen, I believe yen. Do you think this trend will continue? I look at the confiscation of 600 billion of USD as sort of opening the door to future action. Do you think the world perceives it that way as well?
Well, Jay, no international medium of exchange or reserve currency has lasted more than 100 years or so, maybe 125 years. The US dollar has been on top a long time, but unfortunately, many countries were already looking for an alternative because if you have a medium of exchange, it's supposed to be neutral. Anybody's supposed to be able to use it for anything. But unfortunately, I say unfortunately because I'm an American, Washington in recent years says, no, if we don't like you, we're going to cut you off. We're going to make it impossible to use the US dollar. So many people around the world say, wait a minute, that's not the way it's supposed to work. So they have already started looking for a competitor. What happened recently in Ukraine when the US just completely cut off anybody they didn't like and took assets. I mean, they just literally took assets from people, no trials, no anything. In fact, some of the people are not guilty of anything except being the wrong people. So this has now scared a lot of people, and many people are accelerating the move to find something to compete with the dollar. China, Russia, India, Iran, Brazil, many countries are saying we've got to find something else. The fundamentals of America are terrible. We're the largest debtor nation in the history of the world. And now the politics are terrible because Washington can cut anybody off at any time, and that can ruin people. And if we're going to have a medium of exchange, international medium of exchange, it has to be neutral. So everybody's looking for something new.
So then let me ask you, what do you think is the strategy in Washington? Do you think this was just a short-sighted decision, or do you think it's a small part of a bigger plan and there's some longer time horizon actions in the pipeline? Like, what was the motivation therefore from Washington to weaponize the dollar so dramatically?
Well, the best I can determine is hubris or lack of understanding of how history works, of how the world works. In Washington, they say, listen, you do what we say because we're Washington. They're always saying there must be a rule of law. But what they don't then say is, but we tell you what the rule of law is. You cannot determine the rule of law. You got to listen to us. So people don't like that. I mean, as I say, whether you're friends or enemies of the US, you've got to be able to act independently based on facts. And when the facts are that if Washington doesn't like you for any reason, they cut you off. I mean, I hope it's just hubris. It looks like it might just be pure stupidity or lack of knowledge or arrogance. It may be just complete arrogance. As you may know, I don't think more than 30 or 35 countries have joined America on the sanctions against Russia recently. Most countries, by far most countries in the world, have not joined the sanctions, but Washington doesn't care. You know, they say, listen, you do what we say or you will suffer.
That's right. 30 or 35 countries joined the US in those sanctions. There's a lot left in the balance in some major economies. And it makes sense when you think about it because, take Europe, for example, right? They have, said publicly they're going to wean themselves off of Russian oil and gas. And that's an easy thing to say, right? But once winter rolls around and it gets cold outside, it's harder to do because they don't have any other options. And so take that as an example. They'll probably, I don't know, maybe end up going back to the negotiating table with Russia and say, okay, we'll take what you're selling. And I look at if energy is the real currency of Russia, then maybe that's the conversation that the other, not these 30, 35 countries that have aligned with the US, but every other country is asking themselves is, look, we're heading into an energy shortage. Where can we buy oil and gas? And, Russia's a great example. I wonder if there's going to be a grander redrawing of the geopolitical power balances in the East and the West off the heels of this event.
Well, it already was taking place. I mean, I guess I know what's happened in Asia in the last decade or two. I mean, there are over 3 billion people in Asia. They're not big debtors, most of them. They have gigantic assets, and they're getting very successful. I'm not the only one who knows this. Most people seem to know what's happening in Asia. So the world is already moving towards Asia anyway. China's a very large trading partner with many countries in the world, whether we like it or not. Doesn't matter if we like it, Jay, it's happening. History is happening. History is marching on. So yes, this is happening. And the actions in Washington are just driving more and more people, are making more people examine their positions. And you're exactly right about oil and gas. I mean, the Germans are sitting here suddenly saying to themselves, what do we do now? We've closed our coal mines, we've closed our nuclear power plants, and now the Russians have cut off the oil and gas. So, I mean, not just Germany, but lots of people are suddenly faced with a serious, serious dilemma.
And the near-term access to energy isn't nuclear. It's got to be coal, right? Those are the easier plants to fire up, the easier energy source to turn on. Is that correct?
Well, coal is cheaper than nearly anything else, and there's lots of it out there, and there are lots of coal energy plants already. Many of them have been closed for the reasons, but now people are worried and starting. I mean, I'm a director of a coal company, and business is booming because everybody desperately needs coal now, and nuclear. I mean, nuclear energy is very clean and very cheap if you do it right. I mean, if you make a mistake, it's an unbelievable disaster. But nuclear is great unless there's a mistake. So people are now re-examining lots of things, and many people are now re-examining their attitude towards world trade and who they should be open to. The Germans, especially right now, are in a very, very serious bind. America's is having problems too. I mean, every day people are complaining about the price of gasoline in the US. It's going through the roof. And in Washington, they refuse to open. I mean, there's a major pipeline, but they refuse to open it. And they refuse to let people drill for oil and gas. And they refuse to let people mine coal or open coal. So Washington is just making it worse. But again, Washington, I don't know what happens when people go to Washington and they develop some kind of mindset that some people describe as arrogance, or others describe as ignorance.
Well, yeah, when you talk about world trade rebalancing and who people are willing to do business with, China is the largest client of most exporters in the world, including Saudi Arabia. So, I guess if we redraw these lines, who are you going to stay loyal to? If China says, we'll buy all the oil you have to sell, but you have to sell it to us in this other currency, whether that's yen or something different, they do have the power to do that. If you were to speculate, Jim, on what future reserve currency we might be heading towards, does anything come to mind as a viable alternative that's large enough to do the job?
But Jay, I look every day because it's going to affect everybody for the rest of for the next century or so. The renminbi, the Chinese currency, would normally be an obvious choice, but it's a blocked currency. I mean, I can go online and buy the Australian dollar all day or the Canadian dollar all day. You cannot do that with the Chinese currency. So it's impossible for a blocked currency to be the world's medium of exchange. I don't know what it's going to be. As I say, I look for it every day. If you know, Jay, don't do a program yet. Send me an email and then do a program, because I'm looking every day to find out what it's going to be.
All right. Okay, I want to back up for a minute, and we touched on the impact of confiscating financial assets. I want to follow that thread a little bit. There's been not just financial assets, but boats, houses confiscated in London, in New York, from Russian oligarchs in response to this conflict. As a micro example in Canada, and this is not a direct parallel, but I think there's parallels here. We had an occurrence last year where there was a convoy of trucks that headed to Ottawa as part of an organized protest. They raised a bunch of money on GoFundMe, and the Canadian government responded by confiscating or freezing the bank accounts of any civilians who donated to what was at the time a completely legitimate protest on a platform that's very well known called GoFundMe. But financial assets were frozen with zero warning and zero clarity on when they'd be unfrozen. And it just strikes me as a trend that's occurring, whether it's 600 billion of USD from Russia or the $30 from that 22-year-old kid who got inspired by the trucker convoy. And it strikes me as a dangerous precedent, a slippery slope. And I'm just curious about what happens next.
Jay, it's frightening and dangerous. It's very dangerous. You can just confiscate people's assets with no trial, no anything. If you just call up the sheriff and say, that girl over there, Mary, take her money. And the sheriff takes the money because the government has told him to. No, of course, this is the countries in history that have done this sort of thing have usually wound up with serious, serious problems, and the citizens as well. Is this good? Of course it's not good. Is it dangerous? Yes. Is it worrisome? Yes, yes, yes. And it makes one worry about, should I even put money in a place like Canada? Because my money's not safe. If I say the wrong, or not even if I say anything, if somebody in Ottawa makes a mistake and says, oh, that guy Rogers wears blue blazers, get his money, and they'll do it. And there's nothing I can do about it, nothing anybody can do about it. So it makes me anyway, well, not just me, I know lots of people are worried and trying to figure out how to deal with this new world where assets can be seized, no provocation at all, other than the fact that some bureaucrat doesn't like you.
Now, I hear what you're saying, and I believe it, and I'm deeply concerned. And I'm not a pessimist. I'm by all means like a super optimist. However, these trends do concern me. I also have a lot of good friends who are successful entrepreneurs in their own right, self-built, risk takers, intelligent individuals who, however, could not wrap their minds around the fact that events like this could be a trajectory, right? Could be a slippery slope of worst events, right? They've got a lot of faith and confidence in the legitimacy and I guess justice system of our governments. Now, I struggle sometimes having conversations with friends like that because I want to say, look, actually, things can get worse, bad things can happen, right? Governments can act in surprising and very negative ways, but how do you go about getting that point across, Jim, that, what you perceive as a predictable government can change dramatically with very, very little warning?
Well, most people do not believe it certainly about their own government. No Canadian would think, oh my gosh, they won't just take my money. Maybe they'll take the bad guy's money, but I'm not a bad guy. And besides, they cannot do it. Ottawa cannot do it. Well, we're finding out Ottawa can do it. Washington can do it, and that somebody might do it. I'm not saying that these people are bad people or anything else. I'm just telling you that history is full of examples of things where people have had their assets snatched away from them, but people who were essentially honest, hardworking people. You know what the Germans did in the 30s? They just took, if they didn't like you, they took your money, period. Even if you were honest, hardworking, et cetera, religious, it didn't matter. It's happened many times in history. The Russians did it, the Chinese did it, and the Americans have done it. So I don't know how you convince people. I can sit all day long, or you can sit all day long. Well, most people in Canada would say, yeah, well, that's other countries. That's third world countries. That's not Canada.
Yeah.
Well, you just have pointed out it is Canada, or it can be Canada, and it might be Canada.
Yeah.
And many people have found out in the last 5 or 6 years that it can be the US as well.
So talk to me about your portfolio, Jim. Where are you exposed right now? Where are you storing wealth?
Well, as I look around the world, Jay, bonds are certainly a bubble. Bonds have never been this expensive in the history of the world, unless they're special situation bonds. Property in many countries is forming a bubble. If you go to Korea or New Zealand or many places, property is certainly forming a bubble. Not everywhere, but in many countries. Stocks were forming a bubble. I mean, Tencent went up every day. Samsung went up every day. Amazon went up every day. Not all stocks, but stocks were forming a bubble. So the only thing that I know of that's cheap, I mean, silver is down 60% from its all-time high. That doesn't mean it can't go down a lot more. I'm just saying it's not a bubble when you have an asset that's already down 60%. Sugar is down 60%. These are not bubble prices. They can get cheaper, but commodities are the only assets I know that are still somewhat cheap on a historic basis. So people must do what they know and what they figure out. But I would say the commodities are the cheapest asset around right now, and I do own commodities, especially agriculture.
Okay, that was my question. Yeah, when you talk about commodities, are you talking about hard commodities like the metals or soft commodities like sugar and coffee, et cetera? Where do you go in the commodity sector, Jim?
Well, agriculture has been a disaster for a long time. So normally what I do, Jay, is I try to find what's the cheapest asset. If I were looking at agriculture, say, I would get out 20 agricultural products and see which is down the most, which is down the cheapest. And anybody can do it. It's pretty simple to do. Which metals are down the cheapest? Which energy is down the cheapest? That's the way I usually try to, that's where I start anyway. Doesn't mean that's what I do, but I start my investing or my research that way. I don't like to start at the top with whatever's hot. I like to find what's cheap and start there.
What do you make of the protests in the Netherlands right now in the agriculture sector in response to government intervention?
Well, government intervention, wherever it is, whenever in history, it's usually not good. It's usually not good for anybody, including the country or the government. Maybe a few bureaucrats like it, but it's not good for most people. And certainly farmers, I mean, there's not much more individualist asset class or commercial division than agriculture. I mean, these guys have to go out there more or less by themselves or with some workers and survive. Yeah, the government can help, but the government doesn't usually know much about farming. So no, I have seen poor farmers suffer in many countries throughout history. And if you tell me that the Dutch farmers are having a hard time with the government, I don't have to do much more research. I know you're right.
Right. Okay. All right. Okay. I know
India happened recently. I mean, the Indian government, you know, India has a long history of great weather, the perfect weather for agriculture, you know, perfect soil, perfect everything. And yet the Indian government can really, really mess it up and they have many times. Believe it or not, in India, with all of those natural assets I just mentioned, the government, to protect the farmers, made it illegal for Indian farmers to own more than 5 hectares of land. Now, how can you with 5 hectares compete with a Canadian farmer or an Australian farmer with thousands of hectares? But in India, they say they're helping the farmers. When the government says they're helping you, Jay, you usually should run the other way.
Okay, so
if the government knocks on your door and say, we're here to help you, lock the door.
so geographically speaking, when you are bullish on agriculture, where do you begin to look, Jim? What countries are you looking at? And what if there are specific commodities within agriculture that have piqued your interest, what would they be?
Well, I buy the agricultural products myself. If you're very smart and you know a company that's going to discover lots of copper or wheat in Berlin, buy all you can and then call me because I want to buy it too. So I don't really look at the country so much as I look at the products. And these days you can buy ETFs, and many studies show that buying indexes is better than trying to buy individual anything, stocks, bonds, currencies, commodity, anything. So I mainly buy ETFs now. RJA on the New York Stock Exchange is an agricultural index, which has outperformed the others. I own it.
Okay. Now I know you hold precious metals, Jim. You've usually got a few gold or silver coins on your desk there. Talk to me about
Here it is, silver again.
There it is. Proportions. Do you have hard lines within your portfolio? You like to have 5%, 10% exposure to precious metals or physical gold or silver?
No, I don't have any hard lines like that. I mean, I guess if I were a trust department or a major bank, I would have hard lines like that. You know, somebody would say, okay, everybody 10% in gold or whatever, 8% in technology. I don't invest that way. I'm too lazy or too simple or something. I try to find the good opportunities, whatever they are, and try to focus. Diversification is not a way to get rich. Diversification is a way that brokers can protect themselves if you want to sue them. But if you really want to, you know, Henry Ford didn't diversify. He concentrated and focused. So if you want to get rich, figure out the best basket and put all your eggs in that basket. You've got to get the right basket, Jay, or you go bankrupt pretty quickly. But that's the way to succeed as an investor. It's also a way to go bankrupt very quickly if you get it wrong.
So is your basket agriculture right now?
Well, I own lots of things. I mean, I bought Chinese shares 30 years ago, and I still own a lot of them. So I own a lot of things that I've owned for a long time, but new money right now is mainly going into mainly agriculture, yes.
Okay.
And Uzbekistan, but Uzbekistan is tiny. As you pointed out, it's a very small market.
Okay. And I believe you're right now holding a fair amount of US dollars because it's perceived by the world still, anyways, thus far, as the safe haven asset class, whether or not it is that.
I would say my US dollar position is the largest currency position, at least relative, that I've ever had, for the reason you just said.
Interesting. Okay. Now, isn't that what makes, I mean, you could say it's not a safe haven, but people believe it is. And I ask the question, is there a difference if collectively the population believes something is a safe haven asset class? Doesn't that trust create the safety of that asset class, at least as long as the population believes it so?
Well, you said it, as long as, you know, but when everybody goes to the same side of a boat, you better be worried about going to the other side of the boat, because they often will tip over, and eventually it does tip over. When everybody thinks the same thing, somebody's not thinking. History is pretty clear about that, whether it's war or investing or romance or whatever it happens to be. If you follow the crowd, you usually don't succeed.
So your exposure to US dollars is large relative to your historical exposure. That's been the best bet going for the last 6 months, that's for sure. Are there any metrics or activity that you're paying attention to, Jim, that would start to raise a red flag and say, this bet is getting hot, it's time to exit?
Well, I mentioned the technology bubble, which had formed and it continues to, I mean, they're all down now, but it will probably revive if and when something causes a big rally. There's a lot of pessimism around in the equity markets now, Jay. And normally when when everybody's pessimistic, something happens. Some spark comes along, such as peace in Ukraine, which causes a big rally. I don't know what might change people's pessimism, but I do know that we have staggering amounts of pessimism all over the world in equities. I do not know what will cause that to change, but it nearly always has throughout history and probably will again. So I'm looking for that spark. I mentioned potential peace in Ukraine. That could do it, but it might be something else.
And that spark would be the trigger that would end. I guess my question though, Jim, is what would be the trigger that would end the global confidence in the US dollar that protects it currently as the safe haven asset? What will be
That's already happening. As I said before, many countries, both friends and enemies of the US, are now looking for something to compete with the US dollar because Washington, especially in the last 5 or 10 years, has done a lot to cut people off and so we don't like you, therefore you can not use the US dollar. We put sanctions on you or controls or whatever. So there are many people already looking. And so eventually, people just say, okay, I'm moving my money now. But what's the spark? Who knows? I mean, if you look at Japan, for instance, Japan has had unbelievably low interest rates for a long time. And many times I've said, when is that going to end? It has to end. They're printing huge amounts of money, et cetera. Well, it's finally ending. But you and I could have been sitting here 3 years ago and said, it's absurd what they're doing in Japan. It cannot last. But it did last. I mean, now it's ending. Now the Japanese currency is going down a lot, the lowest it's been in a long time, because enough people finally act together that it changes.
No, I haven't been
following. If you can tell me how to figure out the tipping point for any investment, you're going to be really rich.
I'm with you. All right. Well, I'll let you know if I figure it out. I haven't been watching the Japanese currency regularly, Jim. My question, I guess, would be, is that, a Japan story, or is that a US dollar story? It's at its lowest point in years relative to the US dollar, but almost everything in the world is right now.
Well, I guess you're probably perceptive there. It probably is more US dollar story than anything else, because the US dollar has gotten very strong. And if the dollar is strong, it usually means everything else is weak against it or looks weak against it. So yes, it certainly is a US dollar story to some extent, but in the past several decades, the US dollar has had many periods of great strength. The yen did not collapse. I mean, the head of the Bank of Japan has said more than once, and his word is, I will print unlimited, that's his word, unlimited amounts of money. And he does. It's staggering. It's staggering the amount of money that he prints and the Japanese government, the debt that they run up. And for many years, people have just accepted it. It seems to be cracking now, but this has been going on a long time, Jay. A lot of times, strange things happen in the world and last a long time, but eventually, if it's too good to be true, it's too good to be true, and it's going to change eventually.
Okay. Now, Jim, you have 2 daughters, correct?
Yes.
Can I ask you, what does successful fatherhood look like to you?
Well, that's an extremely good question. You better write that book too. You're going to be really rich from all the books you can write if you know the answer. Well, I mean, the obvious answers are you don't want your kids to go to jail. You don't want them to do really bad things in school. You don't want them to get in trouble. If they're girls, you don't want them to get pregnant. All the things that parents that happen to some children. My kids both do extremely well in school, which is normally something you want your kids to do. But there are many people in history, Jay, who've done badly in school, who've had great success and happiness. I certainly did well in school when I was a kid, so I wanted my kids to as well. I got maybe one reason they're doing well in school. But my kids are teenagers. Jay, no matter what you asked me when I was a teenager, I was wrong. No matter what you asked me, and I told you, I said I was going to be a doctor. Oh my God, thank goodness I didn't become a doctor. At one point I was going to be a lawyer. Thank goodness I'd probably be a lawyer in Atlanta right now if I had listened to some of the things that teenage Jim Rogers said. So all I can do is, so far, they're succeeding at the things that people think their children should succeed at. They're not in jail, they're not pregnant, et cetera, et cetera. So let's hope it continues on the right path.
Got it.
You want your kids to be happy. The main thing is for them to be happy. But for different people have different ways. I mean, some kids are very, very happy playing basketball, which is great if they're good at it. Some kids are great playing music. Some kids are great at getting good marks. Depends on what I have learned. I'll tell you the main lesson I've learned, I guess, is that if there's something they really want to do, you should listen to them and encourage them. Because if they want it, they're just little children. They don't know what that's good or bad. If they don't want to be football players, don't make them be football players. If they want to do whatever it is they want to do, if they want to act, encourage them, push them in that direction, support them. Because for whatever reason, many children are better judges of what they want to do than their parents, including me.
Interesting. I love that. All right. Look, Jim, I'll wrap it up on that one. I appreciate your time. I'm going to see you in Vegas next week. Looking forward to that. Have an excellent day. Appreciate it.
Hooray. Let's do it again sometime, Jay.
All right, thank you for watching this interview. Now, 3 things before I let you go. Number 1, I publish a weekly newsletter and I love writing it. I share my biggest takeaways and action items from the conversations that I have on this channel. In addition, my thoughts on current events, economic events, political events, and you can subscribe for free. Just hit the pinned comment right beneath this video, or just go to jmartin.club and you can subscribe on the website. I'd love to have you join the team. Number 2, ad revenue from this channel is donated to an organization that is super close to my heart called Zero Ceiling. Now, Zero Ceiling's mission is to end youth homelessness, and the way they do this is by giving at-risk urban youth the opportunity to relocate to beautiful wilderness areas and then provide them with supportive housing, career training, and just generally positive influences on their life. I love what they do. Check them out if you're interested. And number 3, if you prefer to listen to my content as opposed to watch it, you can find me wherever you listen to your podcasts. Just search for The Jay Martin Show. All right, thanks again.